Whether you're currently renting or about to sign a new lease, there's a good chance you're calculating how much rent you can afford incorrectly. However, I've found a calculation that will show you exactly how much rent you can afford based on your own financial situation. And nobody's teaching this, which is terrifying because locking yourself into a lease you can't actually afford is the easiest way to go broke. So today we're breaking down the rule that most people use, why it's so dangerous, and the three-step process that gives you the real number. The rule that most people use is the 30% rule, and I genuinely cannot wrap my head around why every financial expert keeps teaching this. The 30% rule states that 30% of your pre-tax income can go towards rent every month. So if you make $5,000 a month, you can spend $1,500 of that on your rent. But I have three problems with this rule that everyone seems to overlook. The first problem also directly explains why people are even teaching this rule in the first place. If you wanted to learn about money rules and financial guidelines, you'd probably want to hear it from an actual financial expert, right? Well, the 30% rule didn't come from one. It came from the US government, but the reason they created it wasn't to help Americans figure out how much rent they can actually afford. It was instead designed as a guideline for determining how much low-income families could pay for subsidized housing. So right now, you'd be making one of the largest financial commitments of your life based on a rule that was never designed for your situation in the first place. For the second problem, picture this. If someone asked you right now how much rent you can afford, you'd probably do the same thing that most people do. You'd take your monthly income and figure out what 30% of it is. And on the surface, that seems reasonable because your income is the main factor, right? But here's what the calculation is completely ignoring. Let's use person A and person B as examples. They both make $50,000 a year, so according to the 30% rule, they should be able to afford the same exact rent. But person A has a car payment of $300 while person B already paid theirs off. Would the 30% rule really work the same way for the both of them then? Of course not, because it has no idea those expenses exist. These recurring monthly obligations are what we call fixed costs, and they matter a lot more than most people realize. But we'll get more into that in a minute. The final problem seems just as obvious as the second, but people actually overlook it more. The 30% rule is based on gross or pre-taxed income, but you don't pay your rent with pre-tax income. If person A lives in Texas and person B lives in California and they both earn $50,000 a year, person A pays no state income tax while person B is in the 6% state tax bracket. So using gross income when you actually pay your bills with your take-home income just doesn't make any sense. So now that we know why the 30% rule falls apart, here is a three-step approach that actually works for you. Remember those fixed costs I mentioned earlier, things like car payments? Well, everyone has them, and housing is the single largest fixed cost for most people, but it's far from the only one. Fixed costs are the things you need to spend money on every single month, no matter what. So some of the most common examples that you probably have include utilities, gas, health insurance, groceries, loan payments, and so on. And to figure out how much you should spend on rent specifically, you need to first figure out how much you should be spending on fixed costs in total. Now, the most well-known rule for this is the 50-30-20 rule, which says that at the most, 50% of your take-home income should go towards fixed costs in order to live comfortably. But there is a real problem with applying that rule today, because it was popularized back in 2005, and since then, the median asking rent has gone up 147%, while the median household income has only gone up 81%. So accounting for, well, reality, most financial experts have updated it to 60% of your net income. So finding your 60% fixed cost number is step number one. Step two is something that most people realize they've never actually done before, but probably should have. If someone asked you right now what your total monthly fixed costs are, not just your rent or your car payment, but every single recurring obligation you have added together, could you answer that? Most people can't because a car payment feels like a car payment and a student loan feels like a student loan. But they're all coming out of one bank account. And if you sit down and add up every fixed cost right now, I bet you that number is higher than you think it is. Now to do this, you could go through your bank statements with a calculator in one hand and a pen in the other, but I don't have time for that and neither do you. What I would recommend instead is to download an app that tracks how much you're spending on fixed costs each month. I like to use the Rocket Money app and it takes a couple of minutes instead of an entire afternoon. So now that you have your monthly fixed costs and your 60% target number, step 3 is where everything starts to come together. Now, subtract every fixed cost you have, excluding your rent if you're currently paying it, and what you're left with is the exact amount you can actually afford to spend on housing every month. Most people who do this for the first time get a number that's significantly lower than they expected, which feels terrifying. But that number is a lot more useful to you than the one the 30% rule gave you because it's actually true. This process is not as simple as the 30% rule, but I can prove to you that using this method will genuinely save you from living paycheck to paycheck. Let's look at person B again. They're in a 6% state income tax bracket, finances a car that costs $300 a month, and makes $50K a year or roughly $4,200 a month. Using the 30% rule, they should be able to afford a $1,250 rent payment. But let's see if they really can. After taxes, person B takes home approximately $3,400 a month. And by using the 60% rule instead, they can spend $2,040 a month on their fixed costs. And if we subtract their $300 car expense, they should have $1,740 a month to spend on rent. But guess what? That's not their only fixed costs. They also have car insurance, student loans, a phone bill, renter's insurance, gas, groceries, and utilities. Everything. Adding these costs up, that leaves person B with only $690 a month to spend on rent. That's not comfortably living in San Diego, that's comfortably living in a 660 square foot apartment in Little Rock, Arkansas. Because with a $1,250 rent payment, they'd be living on a 76% fixed cost ratio. So before you sign anything, run this calculation for yourself. Find your monthly take-home pay, multiply it by 0.6 or 60%, and subtract your actual fixed costs. That number tells you exactly what you can actually afford. And if that number comes back lower than you expected, the single most effective thing you can do is split the cost. Living with a roommate or a partner doesn't just reduce your rent a little, it cuts your entire payment in half. And for a lot of people, that means signing a new lease actually makes sense. But if you want to bring down your other fixed costs so you can increase what you can spend on rent, I broke down these 7 small purchases that save you over $5,000 a year in my last video, which you can check out right here. If I provided you any value today, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you, my friends, for watching, and I will see you next time.